Welcome to another episode of Talking Impact. Today we have my friend, colleague, and amazing psychologist, Mitchell Colp. Mitchell Colp's been a clinical psychologist. His company, Hexagon Psychology, develops assessment tools and training to be able to provide more access to individuals across Canada and in the United States. Mitch's conversation today talks about the underlying factors of resilience, mental health, and how assessment, as well as even being coded, is an opportunity to find your strengths, find your locus of control, and achieve great things, not despite, but actually because of the challenges that you face. Welcome to Talking Impact, your go-to podcast for exploring the powerful connection between mental health, education, and resilient youth. Join us as we uncover insights and stories that inspire classrooms, stronger minds, brighter futures, and a lasting impact in our society. Well, it's great to have you here, Mitch. And
Yeah.
I think we're live, we're rolling.
Fantastic.
You're talking a little bit about your upbringing, and before we dive into the amazing work you're doing in the world of psychology, assessment, and the huge projects you're working on a national and international level to bring assessment not just as, hey, how can we assess the needs for children, youth, and families from a psychological perspective, but how can we use these tools to actually be restorative and not just provide a label, but to actually provide an understanding of strength, an understanding of wholeness, and a path forward. Especially in a profession that is hard to access for so many. But you were mentioning some of your upbringing there, and it was your grandfather who was fishing and fiddling, you said. And just wondering, in terms of your, how you came up, and my grandfathers both were huge influences on who I am today, and spending a lot of time with them as a kid is something that really shaped who I am. And just wondering how, growing up on the East Coast, fisherman background, musical background, how that kind of developed who you are and your strengths as well as your passion.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Chris. And thank you again for letting me be on here today. And I think for me, I grew up in a small rural fishing hamlet called Little Dover, Nova Scotia, and population under 100 kind of deal, right? Where even our schools where I went to, I used to always joke that I had a private school education on a public school budget, because we had a number of teachers and such small class sizes, which didn't give me many options, but it definitely gave me a really good core academic development and a core opportunity to connect with my teachers and the community members because they were my neighbors, and you had to find community in everyone you saw, right? And so for me, growing up in that community helped me when it comes to nurturing these pieces. It made me very much understand how valuable having a positive environment is and a positive community is to supporting development, and how these early influences really craft and shape who you want to end up becoming. Where we learn that you just have to work hard if you want good things. You want to be kind to everyone because everyone's just a friend you haven't met yet. Versus something evil or nefarious is out there. So I grew up with a lot of trust and a lot of hope and a lot of core roots that made me very much believe in the good of people. Because when you needed help, someone was there to help you. And even if they weren't your family. Right.
Very cool. It's just interesting how your career progressed from first marine engineering, really cool trade that definitely fits with your upbringing and the fishing part, and your passion for music as well. I think you've said a few times in another life you may have become a DJ or something of that nature. What was that like? You finding you had a good upbringing, good supports, strong values it seemed, and a lot of strengths that were developing and emerging, and to go from kind of the aspiration towards the engineering side of things, what was the shift, or what was it that drew you towards pursuing psychology instead?
Yeah, so for me, when you're growing up, you're often idolizing and growing up in a community and understanding and finding value in what other people are doing. And so for me, growing up where I did, a lot of the lifestyle was around the industry in fishing or in marine culture, right? And so for me, marine engineering seemed like a natural fit. My father was a marine engineer by training. My family were boat builders
Mm.
as well in the community historically. So it was kind of in you a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
It's like you had the natural gift. But it wasn't actually until my father had said to me, marine engineering is always going to be there.
Mm.
But he had said to me when I was going off to when I was about to start pursuing it a bit more at the post-secondary level, he had said to me, maybe what you should do first is, you seem to be really good at that science stuff, was what my dad had said to me. I remember laughing at that. He's like, and I don't really know what's at university,
Mhm.
because he said I never went, but you should give it a go
Hmm.
and just go there and do science and then
Cool.
see where that takes you.
Yeah.
And if it comes back to marine engineering, that's
Mhm.
fantastic if that's where you find, but you should expose yourself to more because you didn't have that exposure here.
Do you think was that because he had a different dream for you, or that he saw your potential
hmm
and your
hmm
sense of purpose?
Yeah. I think he did.
Yeah.
I think and later in his life, when I would talk to him about that, he said to me, Mitch, I knew you could have done that
Hmm.
and you had the natural gift for it.
Mhm.
He said, but my concern was that the lifestyle of being away half of the year and home half of the year doesn't do much for you to have a family. From his perspective, he said, there's not a lot of women like your mother,
Hmm.
he said to me. And, I know a lot of people are successful in those careers and industries, but he just said to me, I wanted something different for you,
Mhm.
but I didn't know what was the different,
Hmm.
right? Because he grew up in the trades, finished his, he got through high school, but didn't get to go further and just had to go to work,
Mhm.
right? But learned from the older guys that you worked with how you do what you do,
Huh.
right?
Right.
And so that's where he's now. He's now with Coast Guard,
Yeah.
as an example,
Cool.
in
Okay.
Eastern Canada. But with me, he said, yeah, just go. And ironically, when I landed, I started in sciences and I was going to move and I was still looking for a trade. It was something that was
Mhm.
like, I still had that mindset, you got to get a job after this. And what does a Bachelor of Science in Biology do? And at that time, so I kept looking from that. And I remember I had to take these extra electives and the academic advisor at the time that said, if you really want to boost your GPA in the sciences, you should take some of these psych courses
Mhm.
as kind of as a tease, a little bit of like, oh, it's for you it'd be easy.
Mhm.
And I always kind of laughed at that, right? And I was like, oh, okay, sounds good. I don't know what the psychology stuff is. And so I took my very first course and I got introduced to a professor there, Dr. Stacy McKinnon at University of Prince Edward Island. And she, after that very first course, took me under her wing,
Hmm.
and she inspired me to stay into psychology, flip my majors.
Mhm.
And when it came up to the end where I was going to do my honors and maybe try to go into social psychology, which was her area,
Fun.
a very fun
Yeah.
area,
Yeah.
she said to me, Mitch, I really think that's awesome and I really appreciate that, but I really do think you'd benefit from taking psychology more applied, like you've always wanted to be applied.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe you should become a psychologist
Yeah.
and you should meet Dr. Jason Dwaran, who became my supervisor, and he was a child psychologist.
Mhm. Mhm.
And at that point, I didn't know all that.
Yeah.
And so I ended up on this pathway based on just positive mentorship, positive connections, realizing what I really enjoyed and how it wasn't all that different in that understanding the mind, understanding the systems that influence a person's development and sequence
Mhm.
is not unlike working on an engine
Yeah.
or working on a complex system
Right. Right.
mechanically.
Yeah.
Understanding the base components, understanding the things that are going really well,
Mhm.
and the things that could be tweaked or improved was
Right.
an opportunity there where I found it felt quite natural for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I work with kids or families today, I don't only just think about them from those, soft constructs perspective of intelligence or grit or resilience. I think of it as you need this whole mechanism to work well,
Mhm.
which some of those things the kids have influenced on,
Yeah.
and some of that is the responsibility of our community
Mhm.
to provide.
Yeah.
And if that all works together, if those grease fittings
Yeah.
work
Yeah. Yeah.
and that oil stays there, we can produce something really
Yeah.
great.
Help me understand this, Mitch. I think
Yeah.
this is something I'm curious about you
Yeah.
as a person, as a
hmm
friend, and as a
hmm
colleague
hmm
around. That relationship between the practice of working with a child, working with a teenager, working with the family system as a therapist, that interpersonal aspect, the guidance, the support, but then I know you as is the engineer, the one
Mm-hmm.
behind, kind of a bit of the Wizard of Oz, who's putting the pieces together in such a way that we can measure the thing
Yeah.
and do it in a broader perspective.
Yes.
How did you find a joy and a love for that interpersonal side of actually working with individuals, and
Mm-hmm.
how did assessment come into the picture as the obvious way to be able to scale good practice?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, again, I realized that getting really good at the interpersonal pieces and trying to understand, how we can subtly influence a system by being a trusted advisor and navigator, and at times what feels like a friend, within boundaries, of course, and to try to move people. Where assessment filled into that was sometimes I wanted to be able to understand what was actually impacting here, what's actually the mechanism
Hmm.
that's impacted. And sometimes we do need uh, tools that are beyond conversation to help us understand what
Hmm.
this could be. A person often has incredible insight as to what their daily lived experience is and what their challenges are, but it's always perceived through their own filters.
Hmm.
And then, even as psychologists, we're perceiving things through our own filters. And both of those filters could be off a few thou
Yeah.
or a few millimeters
Hmm.
in terms of what actually could be going on. So I find assessment provides a better opportunity to critically review what actually could be at play here from a perspective of reducing bias
Hmm.
in that, and trying to reduce the guardedness that people might feel when they're coming into these conversations. Now, that being said, you have to have a very good interpersonal connection with a person
Yeah.
for them to put down their defenses in order for you to actually have a successful assessment to take
Hmm.
place. But through assessment, I do find it's a wonderful opportunity not to label
Right.
and stigmatize it.
That was,
It's
yeah.
yeah, it's really the heart of it
Hmm.
is really intended to find the unique strengths and abilities and opportunities that these
Hmm.
families or individuals or kids
Yeah.
have, and find the opportunities for improvement,
Hmm.
which, if you threw psychologists or physicians or any other person under the same microscope at what it could feel like at
Hmm.
times, we all have things we're working on
Yeah.
because that's the condition of being human.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how I see that.
I think so often the stigma around assessment is you're being pigeonholed, you're being
Yeah.
labeled,
Hmm.
and from a hero's perspective, from an impact society perspective, like these are the things we want to navigate, not to identify with.
Hmm.
Is that stigma true?
Hmm.
Is it maybe unwarranted? And
Hmm.
how do you take it from that idea of, oh, we're just doing this so that we can figure out what's wrong with you, to actually we're trying to understand the underlying codex, if you
Hmm.
will, of
Hmm.
who you are and
Hmm.
how you are uniquely built,
Hmm.
what challenges you have, but also what strengths come with that.
Hmm.
How do you address that? I guess you're working with psychologists and,
Hmm.
and, and mental health workers in the
Hmm.
caring professions, nationally and internationally.
Hmm.
How do you help them to take it from a box to put the person in to check something,
Hmm.
to now this is a tool, now that we have the assessment, now we can actually unlock more and move forward from a
Hmm.
strength-based perspective?
Hmm. I think I usually start that conversation off reminding psychologists and other mental health professionals that you're a healer
Mm.
by virtue. So come into assessment with the idea of healing or supporting an individual or bringing out the good and the great in them. And when you come in with that mindset, it really changes how you view what you're doing day to day because you're really looking for assets. Like you're excited, like
Yeah.
you're like a kid under a Christmas tree, looking for
Yeah.
presents, right? Like it's an exciting moment. And for me, I get excited when I find strengths in my clients that are, either a relative strength for them or normative strength
Mhm.
compared to others their age. Like what a cool gift you've been given. So for me, when I'm working with other professionals, I talk about, I remind them about the healing perspective, and two, I also want them to remember that the diagnoses in and of themselves were really ever intended to be a shorthand, to be conversational between
Mm.
specialists, right?
Yeah.
And they were never meant to blow up into more meaning or value beyond shorthand. It's meant
Mhm.
to say, if it's depression or anxiety based on whatever diagnostic classification system you choose to use, whether that's DSM-5 for North America or ICD-10 for most of the other world.
Hmm. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
as an example, it was just meant to be a way to categorize and simplify something that's more complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, from my perspective, I don't care if we call depression peanut butter and jelly,
Yeah.
fundamentally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I don't care as much about what the diagnosis is. I care what the symptoms are.
Mm.
Because you can have depression diagnosed, which could be a very different constellation of symptoms than another person with depression who might have a very different constellation of symptoms.
Mm.
So the wording for me as a healer and as a psychologist
Yeah.
is just a word that we can talk, but then it comes down to the next part, which is, but what are your symptoms? And at the end of the day, that's what I want to treat, and
Yeah.
that's what I want to make better.
Yeah.
And the depression was really meant to be for us. So every time I'm suggesting to psychologists when they're writing reports or making diagnostic letters or filling ticky boxes for governments that need
Mhm.
it at times for gatekeeping purposes, that we recognize it is only meant for gatekeeping purposes or for clients who feel they need to identify this as a thing,
Mhm.
but not to be a define of who they are,
There it is.
right?
That's
And
the fear most parents
yeah,
have. And is that mostly stigma, or is there actually something to that? I hear the term coded kids,
yeah,
classroom for coded, and I'm like, you're batching them by a label
yes.
versus addressing what you just spoke to.
Yeah, humans by virtue love categories.
Yeah.
We like boxes. That's why we like rooms with doors.
Ah,
Do you know what I
yeah.
mean, right? We like things. We have a living room and a kitchen.
Hmm.
We like compartmentalizing things, and it helps reduce the cognitive load of treating everything as an individual,
Right.
where it's a simplistic approach. Now, for parents who are concerned about the coding, you're hearing this language. I really think I think the language really needs to change because a kid is a kid,
Hmm.
and even if all kids share the same code or classification or diagnosis, is not unlike that people share the same hair color. There are differences,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to helping teachers and educators understand that just because they may have a
Mhm.
diagnosis, it doesn't define exactly who they are or
Yeah.
who they will ever
Yeah.
become,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's in the same way that, people may experience things like diabetes, doesn't define their personality,
Yeah.
what they can achieve,
Hmm.
who they can be,
Yeah.
who they can marry, who they be successful in their future.
Mm.
It's just a here and now thing, no different than your blood type,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the end of
Yeah.
the day, and we can, but the best thing about mental health
Yeah.
conditions is we can change the blood type,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
otherwise hard
Yeah.
coded for other things, but for our purpose, it's an ability to help you identify even the strengths within that,
Mhm.
to make your life easier.
Yeah. I often liken it to, owning a car, right?
Yes.
The assessment isn't the label of the car, but often there's a risk that that is either perceived or taken on as that
Yeah.
individual. On the other hand, really, I think what good assessment does is it gives you that owner's manual
Hmm.
so that you can drive your car
Hmm.
knowing what it does best, when
Hmm.
to check in on things, how to look under the hood,
Hmm.
what the warning lights look like.
Totally.
Can you give me a story? I know you work with a lot of young people,
Hmm.
especially young people with, who are on the neurodivergent spectrum, and
Hmm.
families that are dealing with that whole process of, oh my gosh, my kid has this label. How do we sort this out? Maybe sometimes how do we fix it? But more importantly, how do we bring out the best in them, not
Hmm.
despite, but because of now what we
Hmm.
understand? Can you tell me a story, or,
Hmm.
or an example of, how assessment has helped to unlock the strengths and broaden the understanding of a kid and their families?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think a really good example of that was early in my career, and the reason I'll bring this up is because it's popped up in my life again since, which I think is just a really cool front and end of the picture, right? For at least as of today's timestamp. When I was earlier in my career, I did an assessment on a youth, a male who came to us because they were experiencing significant academic struggles,
Hmm.
and we identified that there was some reading-based challenges that, based on classification systems, but some might refer to as a reading disability, which meant that this kid just learned differently from reading,
Yeah.
and we had to find different ways to get that information in. But once it was in the vault,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's fantastic.
Mhm.
Reading disability really means reading difference,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
It's just that it doesn't respond to the typical things we do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like a can that's hard to open. It
Yes.
can still open. It's just not with the typical can opener you may are used to
And
using.
it's
That's
often stronger,
and it's often
right?
stronger. Yes, we do find that. And so we had a youth that was having some challenges with reading, and then similarly also had challenges with attention and focus.
Mm.
And so they ended up going to their family doctor following that assessment, and they were diagnosed with ADHD by myself at that time. I identified both, again, as a way, as gatekeeping at times what's going on and better describing it. And they received medication from the doctor. We put in some school-based interventions and supports for the kiddo. And then I didn't hear anything more. Time goes by, well, 10 years go by. And I get an email not that long ago from a family member telling me, Mitch, I just want to let you know that, I saw you the other day. I didn't say nothing. I saw you at the store or whatever,
Mhm.
but it made me think of you for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to reach out to you. I didn't have your new email kind of deal, right? So they hunt me down
Mhm.
and they said, I just want to let you know that they're now in engineering at university,
Attaboy. Yeah.
right? In an area that, earlier assessments on this kid, when I had read them,
Mhm.
made it seem like this kid would never achieve, never be successful, because assessments done in the past were much. I find if you find those, and I think this is where some of the stigma comes, is like they were written more fire and brimstone at one time,
Mhm.
and that was a very sad
Yep.
and not great thing to do.
Here's your developmental path.
Oh my
Good
goodness.
luck.
It's like I don't have a crystal ball. How dare I predict your son's success,
Right.
right? I have some good indicators of how they'll do, but I also have a lot of hope
Mm.
because they had strong cognitive skills. They had an awesome family system. I knew if we can take care of the reading and the attention piece, they can do whatever they wanted.
Right.
There was nothing that I thought could stop them if they can get through these pieces. And they ended up in post-secondary, and then later the kid followed up and said thank you as well, who's now, a young man.
Well on its way.
Yeah,
Very
and
cool.
so when you hear these stories, it gives you hope as a clinician, and it makes you feel proud, even though it's not my son.
Yeah.
It would make me proud if he was my son.
But hey, you didn't become an engineer, but you unlocked another. So you've done well by the engineering professions.
Well, exactly. At least if I plucked one from the
Yeah.
pool, I put one in. At least.
Amazing,
Exactly.
amazing. And obviously, you've not just worked with many, many youth and families since, but
Mhm.
you are developing tools and trainings for
Mhm.
others to be part of that same journey.
Yeah.
Yet there's still so many kids, and maybe even they have an amazing psychologist and support system,
Mhm.
but they're still perceived as that label. You speak a lot about these invisible barriers that young people have,
Mhm.
that they're struggling with being either mislabeled or even having those issues ignored. And you can just imagine how that young man would have done had no one
Mhm.
been
Yeah.
there to check under the hood and take him
Totally.
to the right
Mhm.
support to find out what's going on and bring out the best. So
Totally.
what do we get wrong, I think, in this topic of the invisible barriers, like ADHD, anxiety, autism, which is,
Mhm.
becoming more and more prevalent in
Mhm.
terms of the diagnosis of. I have
Mhm.
my own thoughts in terms of
Oh, for sure.
how prevalent it
Mhm.
was before and is now. I think
Mhm.
it's a part of the human condition, that said.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Tell me, to unlock that for me in terms of how do we get that wrong about these challenges and these labels as a society and just from a general perspective.
Yeah. We often judge books by covers, right?
Mhm.
And I think we often infer character related attributes to the behaviors we see.
Mhm.
If you see someone jaywalking, you might think something about them as their
Mhm.
character. They just don't care, right?
When I do it, it's fine, but when someone else does,
100%. You mean I am justified.
I'm busy.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting we see things, and I think that's a prime example when especially for things like learning disabilities, ADHD, and autism, depending on the severity, they can be perceived as invisible.
Mhm.
But we're watching behaviors and we're assuming attributes about the kid or the adult in this way. And as a prime example of that, if you see a kiddo, telling their teacher to, take a hike because they don't want to do math, or you see a child who's laying on their bed playing their Switch and they
Mm,
were told 5 times to clean their room. We're thinking, oh my goodness, are they just lazy or they're defiant or
mm,
all these types of labels? And then we project that as a personality characteristic on them. It's like,
mhm.
well, that's just how they are,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I always think when we see behaviors can definitely be telling about character,
Mhm.
no doubt. The fact that good people can make mistakes, and if they don't keep doing it, it's probably they're a good person. Do you
Yes.
mean
Yeah.
right? Same idea. But at the same time, when it comes to things like those examples I gave you, there could be a very valid reason that why we're seeing that. For some kids that are acting defiant, quote
Mhm.
unquote, which just means debating,
Mhm.
depending how you want to
Yep, yep,
review it
yep.
and reframe it, there's a perspective or perhaps a chance that they are fearful or sad or confused about what's being asked of them.
Mhm.
And they don't want to make a mistake,
Yeah. Oh, fear
right?
of failure, fear of rejection.
Fear of failure, fear of rejection. And there's a perception that, sometimes it's easier to be yelled at than it is to accept and to be witness to a reason for why your self esteem is as low as it is,
Mm.
right? It's like I'd rather be yelled at than fail,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Because at least if I get yelled at, I don't hurt as much as
yeah,
if I do when I
yeah.
fail.
It's fine being told that I'm lazy over
Hmm.
and over
Hmm.
than to try something and be rejected for it.
100%. And then similarly, on the other circumstance, if you have a kid that's, not listening
Mhm.
to a parent, as an example, when they're requested to do something, we also have to consider, is the task I'm requesting developmentally appropriate?
Mhm.
Sometimes we ask a lot of our kids, do this, then do that, then do that. I know a lot of adults that struggle with 3-point
Yeah,
instructions,
yeah,
let alone 2-point.
yeah.
And as a married husband, I struggle past a one,
Yeah, yeah.
and probably my wife would agree. And I think there's an expectation that we treat kids from an invisible perspective as having all the skills and being as good as how they sound. So if they can talk well to
Oh,
you,
yeah.
they assume that everything else should be fine,
That was my problem. Yeah,
right? And we assume that everything can be fine, and then you load up too many expectations.
yeah.
And surprise, surprise, some kids have a hard time managing that. In the same way, if you were honest with if as parents we were honest with ourselves,
Mhm.
we probably struggled with too,
Mhm.
if that shoe would have been on the other foot.
So I'm curious, we can kind of take the perspective of this young person, especially what we know about identity formation in that
Mm,
11 to 14
mhm,
puberty formative years
100%.
is when we're forming not the roots as well as a lot of the
Mhm,
behaviors of our identity, how we perceive ourselves and
yeah.
how we feel about ourselves. For a young person who's going through that invisible barrier, how does a scenario like that affect how they view themselves and how they're building out their
Mhm,
framework for identity?
mhm. I think when we give kids and youth an opportunity to be successful by giving them developmentally appropriate expectations or giving them opportunities to tell us what they need in order to achieve,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I think it helps them understand what's in their toolkit of what they can manage themselves and what they can manage with support.
Yeah.
And because there's always going to be support, hopefully in a supportive environment, community,
Hopefully. Yeah.
people are there. And if not, hopefully they can tap on external resources, even as friends, if family's not there, or other
Mhm.
community services, if those people aren't there. I'd hope that no one's ever truly alone. And even if they are, I think there's still opportunities to find connection despite that. But
Hopefully, yeah, yeah.
that's a whole other
I think we
sidebar.
can do better on that front.
We can do better on that
Go on.
as a
Yeah,
population,
absolutely.
for sure. But I would say that if there are circumstances where, we are setting uh, kids up for failure at times by assuming these character traits on them, I think it could really lead them to feel that they are inadequate,
Hmm.
unable, and demotivated, right? We talk about the word locus of control,
Hmm.
and locus of control is a fancy way of saying, are they in control of their environment?
Hmm.
Right? Whether they have an internal locus, meaning, if I want things to change, I can do something about it, versus an external locus of control, referring to the fact that if I want things to change, I can't do anything about it. Someone's going to have to do it for
Hmm.
me,
So
right?
think about the map that we've built on the
Mm-hmm.
domains
Mm-hmm.
that produce the resilience of the young people
Mm-hmm.
who go through heroes. And right
Mm-hmm.
in the bullseye there,
Mm-hmm.
right under identity,
Mm-hmm.
is that agency locus of control.
Mm-hmm.
how important is that when it comes to the long-term outlook of a young person, coded, not coded, just
Mm,
generally speaking, how
mhm,
important is that factor of locus of control in one's ability to achieve their dreams and to
mhm.
not just for themselves, but to be a positive influence for others?
Yeah. I would probably argue the locus of control is one of the most paramount factors for a young person
Yeah.
developing. To think that you can do things and influence your environment, whether that's from attaining your goals, impacting from a civic engagement or community
Mhm.
activism kind of scenario, thinking that your being can influence the world is a cornerstone and often is what brings people value and meaning in their life,
Mm.
right? Because many people have an aspiration to do things or help others or leave a mark on the world.
Mhm.
And whether that's, you know, leave a mark on themselves and their positive development or leave a mark on others and influence and mentor and
Mhm.
create the next generation.
Yeah.
It's a legacy. And I think without that, life doesn't feel sometimes like it has a lot of meaning
Yeah.
if you don't feel like you have a role to play in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Interesting. Yeah.
You're witnessing life versus
Mhm.
participating,
Yeah.
which I think is a different kind of game,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And I think like so much of this I think falls into this concept of grit, which you and I've talked about a
Hmm.
number of times over the years,
Hmm.
and how this locus of control is very different than stick to itiveness or grit
Hmm.
or perseverance,
Hmm.
although that's a factor
Hmm.
related. I think so often, whether it's as a parent or as a coach or as a leader,
Hmm.
we want them to just keep going,
Hmm.
keep doing it. You hear it all
Hmm.
the time. You see it in movies, you see it in shows, and sometimes you hear it and sometimes you repeat it.
Hmm.
You just got to stick with it. You got to have more grit.
Hmm.
Um, Question I have in terms of locus of control, how does it compare to grit? But also, I think beyond that is this concept of resilience
Hmm.
and kind of paint that picture as you've
Hmm.
done with me before of
Hmm.
how grit is a part of but not a fix for
Hmm.
locus of control,
Hmm.
and how resilience is much more of a broader understanding of what I think we're trying to get at when we say just stick with it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so what I see as again, we'll go back to my mechanic nature a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, please do.
And if we think of a process or a system, I often think that locus of control or the belief that I can have influence or impact the world and that things can change because I have agency to change it.
Hmm.
I feel that is a cornerstone of allowing grit to manifest. Because if a person doesn't feel that they have the ability to change or do things, then it's hard to maintain grit. It's hard to keep your hands on the steering wheel, as it
Hmm.
were,
Hmm.
proverbially. That if you don't believe that you have any control of where it's pointing, right?
Hmm.
It's easy to become avoidant, despondent, away from engagement. So I think that locus of control, I believe, would probably be connected to grit. And I think the amount of grit we have can also have a backward chain on helping us believe whether or not we have power and control in changing the world too,
Hmm.
right? Because the fact is that if we have we have locus of control, we can have some purpose, right?
Hmm.
And if we have purpose and mixed with some persistence that can allow us to the stick to itiveness, part of grit, then we are able to keep pushing that forward and keep feeling these belief systems that help guide us forward in a point.
Hmm.
But if we have a sense of purpose but reduced persistence
Hmm.
or that grit, I think it diminishes how we feel we can have influence in the world.
Right.
So I think it's a straight arrow, but it does have a reverb that
Hmm.
comes back. Essentially, there's my music coming through,
Yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit
yeah,
of a
absolutely.
little bit of bass coming
And
back,
resonance.
a little
Yeah,
resonance
yeah.
that still influences how we view the world,
Hmm.
because locus of control is so much more central to identity than the grit that we can help manifest
Yeah, yeah.
as a result of
You
it.
apply grit.
You apply
But
grit.
if it's applied from the outside,
Yes,
it's not anchored,
it's not anchored. So if you don't believe you can have influence and impact the world, what's the point of having grit?
right?
Uh, you
Just got
know,
to get through today.
you got to get through
Yeah.
today, which doesn't give you a whole big sense of purpose. So
Mhm.
for some of these individuals, you wonder, how do they have so much tenacity
Yeah.
to keep going?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because they believe they can,
Hmm.
and they believe what they do can change the world,
Yeah.
or change their circumstance, or
Yeah.
change their situation,
Yeah.
or make things better, and gives them hope. And that's, for me, my only job as a
Mhm.
psychologist
Yeah.
is to give people more hope than they
Right.
started
Yeah.
with the idea that by fostering a locus of control, fostering and giving them opportunity to observe hope in their life, they often are able to move forward with grit to
Mhm.
take on challenges. And when it comes to resilience, I see as resilience as being a a bit of an overarching umbrella over these
Mhm.
oftentimes, because to be truly resilient to your environment, you really have to believe that you can influence what's happening to you and be able to stick to it if you want to make that change happen.
I love that. The definition I like about resilience, and I'd love to
Mhm.
hear yours,
Mhm.
is the innate capacity. We all have
Mhm.
the capacity to be resilient, but we'll
Mhm.
get back to that.
Mhm.
But that innate capacity to use one's internal strengths and external supports to not just get through
Mhm.
adversity, but to grow and learn and thrive through
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. And to your point, I would even take that down an area narrower. So in a lot of my research in my doctoral work back in the day on resilience
mhm.
was around that maybe resilience is a, a bit broad,
Mhm.
right? Because you can find that some kids or youth can be resilient to some adversities or challenges or scenarios, but then not to others. And I
It's true.
always was curious, what's that about?
Mhm.
Like, this kid is managing maybe the separation of their parents very well, or this kid's managing these low grades in science, or these social these social challenges they're experiencing with bullying at school. They're being resilient. But yet, if they run out of, ice cream in the cafeteria, it's a 5 alarm fire.
Mhm.
What is that about, right? And so it's fascinating. So I would liken it to that there's the idea of core resilience is an argument that myself and I know Dr. Nordstock at the
Mhm.
University of Calgary often would talk about, which is I believe there are a fundamental set of attributes that every person has that gives them that core innate ability to be resilient.
Mhm.
But then I do think that based on the specific stressor or situation or scenario, pulls in a unique starter pack
Hmm.
of resources that need to tack onto your core, almost like an appendix,
Yeah. Yeah.
needs to
Yeah.
tack on
Yeah.
that's unique
Yeah.
or refined to the
Yeah. Yeah.
situation. So the way I think about it as a visual metaphor
Yeah.
is if you like history as an example,
I do.
and if you think of or maybe early warfare, we would use shields and swords and
Mhm.
things like that, and then became rifles and muskets in later generations. But one thing I think about are shields and resilience. I often think of as a shield,
Mhm.
but just like a shield, depending on what adversity or threat
Mhm.
you're experiencing, a certain type of shield is better for a certain type of situation. If you were riding on horseback, knights in shining armor would have small swords to protect their higher abdomen,
Mhm.
then long swords, often referred to as planks, which would be often defending against arrows.
Right.
But one was very light to move around
Mhm.
and have on a horse with you, and
Mhm.
one you would carry on your back and pray you can get up a hill,
Mhm. Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
deal. And so some were designed for different scenarios. While the metal may have been similarly the same,
Mhm.
the design and how it
Right.
worked,
So domains are the same, but the purpose is different.
purpose is different, which makes the design different, which means that yes, the smaller shield could protect you from arrows,
Mhm.
but you're still very exposed
Hmm.
to other threats from
Right.
other angles.
Yeah.
And in the same way that if you were facing a different type of danger, you would need a different kind of shield.
So resilience doesn't tend to be universally applicable, even if you are high in resilience.
Hmm.
A new scenario or being thrown into a different context or
Hmm.
being displaced or traumatized
Yeah.
can push down that resilience. Now, does it push down their general resilience, or is it just in that situation?
Yeah. So what I find is that if a person with resilience for one scenario enters into a new scenario without the same supports,
Hmm.
it can have a disproportionate impact on their resilience in terms of the injury
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
resilience.
Mhm.
But just like shields can be mended,
Right.
that's why we rely on social supports and external connections. If we have those in the community or other resources, mentors, other
Mhm.
people to help guide us and give us advice on
Mhm.
how to navigate those situations and help us craft a new
Yeah.
shield
Yeah.
for that situation. So the first time entering a new obstacle
Mhm.
is always the hardest.
Yeah.
The next time you did it, it was always easier. Why is that?
Mhm.
It's because you have wisdom
Mhm.
and you have experience and you understand how the game is played.
Yeah.
in the same way a new threat. So there is a piece of this where reasoning and problem solving and experience helps bolster resilience. But the first time you face it, you may feel weak to it
Yeah.
if it's novel
Yeah.
or brand new. But there will be some attributes that will still help you get through that. And by chance, you may have the lucky constellation,
Yeah.
but most people with new challenges always feel a dip in their resilience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the next time it happens, you won't
Right.
to the same degree.
I'm seeing this connection here on locus of control, and almost that being like the thermometer for this slow roast of resilience development, and that being, you can start out with high resilience, but then if you are exposed to an environment that is new, that can challenge that core resilience factor, and obviously you'd be less resilient in this situation. But if that's repeated over time, the messaging you're getting out there is that you don't have control, that you don't have a decision in where this is going. How does, when you see highly resilient individuals, or even the changes that we saw in the longitudinal study, what are some of the core mechanisms that occur behind the curtain of going from low to high resilience? And how does locus of control kind of help us understand the you know the temperature of that?
Yeah, at least my understanding of how I could see that playing out is that with locus of control, it will often make you feel like you're able to have influence and impact the world. And that can continue to be bolstered or fostered in your community by having positive experiences, working with mentors, seeing examples of other youth or other people getting through circumstances or situations, which continues to bolster that, which then means that when you do end up having challenges or confrontations with novel situations, you're at least drawing back on a wisdom or an understanding that others have been here before you and you're likely can get through this. And I think as long as we have a very supportive system of support that's outside of the individual that can help them understand their perspective or their strength in that situation, or give them the emotional support or understanding, whether that's a peer, a parent, a mentor, a community member, teacher, anyone in these spaces plays that critical role that kind of keeps the thermometer hot, right? Because their resilience is good. Right? And they're able to model that to their students and help encourage them to try again. I think it will be better this time. And when you do that, you give it another shot and you realize, yeah, it was easier. You're able to keep the temperature moving higher on that resilience development. It's when people get shut down and their systems are saying, yeah, it's better off not trying, and all those negative narratives, that's how we foster a lack of resilience, and if anything, we foster, atrophy in many ways would be the opposite, right? To not do anything, right?
I have a question for parent, teacher, or mentor out there. I think we've already discussed how natural it is for us to put things in a box, especially if if you're a parent or a teacher, you see that kid struggling with that thing, and it's easier to say, well, maybe that's just not their thing, versus understanding my role isn't to say what is or isn't their thing, as your father did with you.
That's right.
But to look for the underlying strengths that are being applied or can be applied in that young person. But for any parent or teacher, anyone who's helping a young person in their life, how do they help themselves from not blaming themselves or blaming the condition or the young person, and actually get into a resilience building perspective with that young person to be the most appropriate support?
Yeah, I would say in those circumstances, when you see kids or youth struggling in an area, and the most common one I see a lot of times that seems to be, oh, it's okay, is math, right? Math or science, or like there's certain topics that's like, but it's okay, we all struggle with that, right? There's a minimization of it, and that you don't have to keep trying, it's okay, you can take a pass on this. I think there's an aspect here where we can reaffirm to kids and to youth that there's nothing about learning that's hard. There's nothing about learning that's easy. Learning is hard. Developing new brain cells is hard. Some things are going to be challenging, and if it's really challenging, it really often means it's really worth learning, right? Because it can prove something to yourself that you are bigger than it is,
Cool.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I would lean on. And I see this in my past when I was teaching as well at, University of Calgary, Ambrose, St. Mary's, people like this where I would be teaching these math classes or quantitative methods, which I know is not the most, um, you know, entertaining of topics typically, but my moments are when people would come up to me and say, I'm really bad at this. I don't think I can do this. And they're getting very anxious and nervous about it. And I have to tell them that, yeah, 86% of students also feel that way. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And so when kids are feeling these challenges or these moments, I think from a good mentor perspective, we can help remind them that they're not alone in feeling this.
It's huge.
And you're never alone in that. And when it comes to the mentor as well, saying that if you can stick with it and want to keep pushing through and you will learn and know so much more about yourself through trying. And if you can't learn it this way, are there other people who can help you?
Yeah.
Are there other resources you can pull on? Is there another way to work around it? Right? Versus avoid it.
Yes.
Because avoidance is what creates anxiety by virtue
Yes.
or
Absolutely.
stress,
Yeah.
right? You don't avoid your taxes, it's stress. Avoid things that scare you, anxiety. If you avoid the things that are tough, you will learn to avoid a lot of other things. And from a mentor perspective, I don't want my child or anybody I mentor to ever run away from things that are scary.
Right.
Because someday I won't be there to help them walk through it with my help.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I need to be there through the scary times so that they'll feel confident enough to walk it when I'm not there in the future, right?
What I'm seeing is the difference. I think you can have the same hope or goal. I don't want you to have to walk away from something that's scary. One though being this just isn't your thing, or it's my fault, or there's something wrong. Let's try something else that might be scary, but more in your arena, and actually coming at it from, well, this might be a risk. You may fail, but this is actually an opportunity to grow those strengths that you have, come what may, and not be so focused on this outcome that we either slip into hyperachievement and stress, or into depression or defeatism, low resilience. When we're talking about resilience, though, I think this is something to kind of demystify and unpack because it is so broad, as you said. And that's one of the challenges with it. There's lots of great measurements for it, but it's often a cluster, so much so that we had to go and do our own domain analysis to really figure out what are the things that are happening that's contributing to this outcome. First of all, what does high resilience look like? Like, I think about this student who reached out to you, and I'm like, there's a piece. Something we talk about with our educators and our parenting program is just them reaching out and wanting to connect is a sign of not just hope, but a sign of health. What does high resilience look like? And then what does low resilience look like?
Yeah, so on my side of that, I think if you want the observables of what you would notice, I would say this is a person that with high resilience would be a person who believes that they are a worthy individual to be here at a table, at a place. And that is also not just worthy in terms of how they feel about themselves, but also worthy despite opposition from others or the need of external validation. They are off grid for their self-esteem. Their self-esteem is not tied to their achievement, to their accomplishments, to their praise from their parents, or linked to the critics of their success. I think a high self-esteem individual who understands this aspect is quite content with who they are and what they are and where they're going, and they don't seek it. Which for some people you might view them as, wow, they just don't care, right? It's like, no, they're just independent of your influence.
Yeah, often they care deeply.
They do care deeply, and they do care. And I think there's a piece here where there's just a understanding that my self-worth, my identity is not tied to other people's opinions as a high resilient individual, because that means that those barriers of self-perception, self-criticism, negative influence are not going to be taking that person down. Or if they do, and then it's only minor in terms of that, and they can shake it off a little bit, right? That's from a self-esteem perspective. Those people also, obviously, we talked about locus of control.
Mm-hmm.
So what those people don't have is a belief that, life only happens because of chance,
Hmm.
right? Which is the one of the areas of locus of control that people believe that it's just a coin flip. The universe is just random,
Hmm.
electrons hitting each
Yeah.
other and
Yeah.
atoms, and we're
No
here by
purpose.
there's no
Yeah.
purpose, right? I mean, and whether this happens or not to me is not of my control or volition. And I think a healthy person realizes that there are definitely some things that are up to
The
chance.
serenity prayer.
Of course. And I think there are some things that we have to have faith that there are other factors and maybe systems at play that we're unaware of,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not overextending its influence on your day to day
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of way, in that you believe that you have control and you are the master and commander of your ship and where it's
Mm-hmm.
pointing, and you set the trim of the sails of where it goes, while also with a healthy appreciation that there are some things that you won't be able to change without exceptional effort,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise you're naive
Yeah.
in your perceptions, right? So I think a healthy locus of control is someone who has a strong internal locus of what it can achieve, an understanding of external barriers
Mm-hmm.
that can be overcome, but only through great challenge,
Yeah.
and maybe what something they're focused on
Yeah.
for purpose, and an understanding that there is some chance to the
Mm-hmm.
world, that they need to have some, I would say, um, ease in themselves and recognize that that is the thing, some compassion
Mm-hmm.
for that,
Yeah.
self-compassion. So I think locus of control, self-esteem, and then I would move from there into um, the idea of around resilient individual is also able to have at least a typical amount of cognitive memory, problem solving kinds of skills that help them just understand and recognize threats
Mm-hmm.
in order to mount a defense.
This is like where wisdom comes from.
Wisdom.
Yeah.
And I don't always need people to be gifted, high average, low average. Again, I just need a typical amount of understanding risk and threat.
Hmm.
Because even if someone doesn't understand certain aspects of how the world works, they still have the ability to talk to someone and get access to people who do know. In the same way, there's certain things I don't know how to do, even with my PhD.
I was wondering where there's the understanding of and ability to reach out to supports comes in here.
Exactly. And that's where you start to find that is that if I'm not wise enough to challenge this by myself, I'm wise enough to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wise enough to seek out supports.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't have them, then I'll be ingenuitive enough to have people who can find them for me.
Right.
Right. And that's what the importance of community is, whether
Mhm.
that's friends or mentors or teachers or whoever. Right.
Very.
So I would see them as those pieces. I think it's a nice perception. I think there's some state related aspects of how you are as a person, some trait aspects about how you problem solve and reason in the world, and some environmental connections on how I can reach out for my resources when necessary to tackle that.
It's bringing me back to our program and,
Mhm.
and thinking of the, I am, I have, I can model and
Mhm.
framework of building self-concept, identity.
Mhm.
And I kind of see this cognitive wisdom, not just of self, but of how to navigate risk and how to
Mhm.
pull other people's in. Of that, I
Mhm.
have these support systems and understanding and awareness of my environment, of what I can't change often, but also
Mhm.
what I can and what I can bring into
Mhm.
this situation to be able to navigate it. I see the self-esteem really as the I am. Who am I inside? How do I feel about myself? How do I think about myself?
Mhm.
And then that locus of control, I can.
Mhm.
Here are the things I can do. Even though locus of control really is core to it, there's that functional ability of now what am I, so what now what? What am I going to do about it?
Mhm.
You've done an extensive review on the Heroes program and continue to work on some really cool things that we'll probably have another show about one day. But what did you see in the Heroes program and process when you're doing the content analysis and domain analysis that aligns up with what you just brilliantly broke down for us in terms of the core elements of resilience?
Mhm. I would say the way that the Heroes program helps you understand your resources is one thing that I really admire about it, because you start to understand what are your protective and maybe non-protective influences in your life. in this kind of way, right? Like I know we talk about the analogy of the, the balcony friends and things
Mhm.
like that. It's something that, I know even some of my students have commented on and in their own reflection and their
Mhm.
own as psychologists as well, and have looked at even that influence and seeing how powerful our networks are for shaping
Mhm.
how we view ourselves by proxy of the mirrors we receive back from our peers,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And from my angle, I think that's just one aspect that it makes me think about as that analogy where I think we underestimate the importance of the fish tank that we in which live from our community connections that influence how we will engage in the civic natural process of engaging in our community,
Mhm.
how we will pursue obligations and do things. And I also think it will also influence how ultimately we will view ourselves later down the road,
Mhm.
and how, if you really want to change your life, sometimes changing your environment is part of that requirement,
Mhm.
even though it's hard, right? And recognizing that from a social perspective.
Mhm.
Another thing that I was thinking about as I reflect on this is around with the Heroes program, the importance of the self story of how we define our narratives and who we
Mhm.
are and how we're going and where we're going to be. Because the narrative that we tell ourselves of who I am
Mhm.
and what I have and what I can do
Mhm.
is so powerful in terms of setting the story because you're the main character in your narrative.
Mhm.
And being that main character, has specific attributes and abilities to make you either, a beet farmer on the side of the street or a superhero
Mhm.
or a Calgary Flame
Yeah.
or something like that, right? It gives you an aspiration of who you want to become and sets the tone of what you're bold enough to do
Mhm.
later on. I remember even in my own graduate school days, I remember my colleague, John Lang, who's a psychologist I work with, a lovely clinician, would joke to me and said, Mitch, we have a question, but we don't know the answer. And I said, did you just call the author? And they said, why would you just call the author on this test or on this paper? It's like, no, we're just trying to find the answer. It's like, I'm just going to call them.
Mhm.
It's like, wow, what gives you the gall to call them? What gives me the gall is that, is actually what gives me the confidence is to know that they're just another human.
Yeah.
And humans communicate with humans. And status is something we assign to humans.
Mhm.
But people have a desire to connect.
Yeah.
And so, from my perspective, I gave the phone call and they answered.
Cool.
And I got my answer. And I remember it was a jaw dropping moment for my colleague. And I remember laughing about it because I never thought that was a thing to worry about,
Mhm.
was what their status was.
Mhm.
I've called the premier,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Previously, and it's, if they may not answer, but you're allowed to try,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where we get to work a lot together, and just something about you. It's your head office up in Airdrie,
Mm-hmm.
both the clinical side. You have two separate sides. One is
Mm-hmm.
the clinical
Mm-hmm.
practice where you're
Mm-hmm.
working with individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and the other side is really the back to the Wizard of Oz,
Mm-hmm.
behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
the development of these assessments, the
Mm-hmm.
training and equipping.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah,
I don't tell us a little bit, not just a little bit, to break that down for us. What is
sure.
teleassessment? How are
Mm-hmm.
you innovating and really reshaping this field to ensure that more people have more access, not just to those assessments as we've talked about,
Mm-hmm.
but actually to utilize those as these journeys of growth and self-discovery?
Exactly. So yeah, for us, teleassessment, again, we started Hexagon in 2021 in the midst of COVID. And it was born out of a desire for myself and my colleagues to try to find a way to access communities like the one I grew up in,
Mm-hmm.
where the closest thing we had to a psychologist where I grew up in Nova Scotia was my mom.
Mm-hmm.
She was the janitor at our high school. And I always called her the unofficial guidance counselor
Yeah.
because all the kids who didn't come to school or were getting suspended were all the kids who my mom would be friends with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mom would somehow get them back to school and they'd graduate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I always joke that my mom as the janitor was my initial inspiration to become a child psychologist,
Cool.
because she was doing it, and she always used to say, "You're lucky you got your social
Yeah.
skills from me, dear."
Yeah.
As
So
a
this is the
tease.
inspiration to give them the right tools because they're the ones in the closest proximity.
Exactly, they're the ones that are needing help. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there,
Mm-hmm.
right? The behavior is the behavior, but what you're really saying is, I need help.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to get it, and there's something going on in my system. Otherwise, I want to be a good kid.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pass. I don't want to yell at the teacher. I want to be liked,
Yeah.
right? And some kids have a hard time with that. And so for me, in starting Hexagon with my colleagues, we had talked about how do we provide access to communities and regions and places that one don't have access or very limited access, or the quality of the services in those areas are very limited, just due to this lack of supply, right? Not due to the fact that these clinicians that are there, who are lovely, are having to become jack of all trades
Yeah.
to navigate that, and they want consultation too, because they want to do good by their communities. And so we started Hexagon to do teleassessment, which was a fancy way of saying providing psychological assessments over the internet, online, through the computer. And so by doing that, we've been able to work with school boards and health authorities, private individuals and communities, all the way from Yukon to Newfoundland, across Canada, to do that work. And to do that, we had to get licensed in every Canadian province and jurisdiction, which was by itself a rogue move at the time. We were seen as, at the time, as disruptors. We don't have a process for you, essentially, is what we were told. We even had received communication from larger bodies that, you won't find a clinic that can do this work, and I was thinking, well, I guess I'll just do it then. And we started doing this work in Alberta, and then we moved and did a lot of work in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and Newfoundland. And next thing you know, the government of Canada and government of New Brunswick and other groups had reached out and said, we'd love you to keep doing this work and keep doing this work. And how can you go about creating a training program to teach other psychologists how to do it? And by the end of this year here, we've been in a process of creating the only training in Canada on how to do it. We've created the national guidelines on how to do it well, and be helpful and not harmful for people, and continue to do it and change lives, which has been, for me, like a legacy piece for me and my colleagues who are doing this.
We know that there's a huge bottleneck, and especially in rural communities. The time, the wait list, even if you have benefits, the cost of seeing a psychologist and getting an assessment. How has this work proliferated access for those who need it most, and those who have a difficult time reaching it? And where do you see this going in terms of making truly effective psychological assessment and support universally available?
What I've been really pleased to see is that with the more recent adoption and the kind of green lighting to teleassessment that's been happening now, and the fact that we are updating graduate programs to include it and embed it in the programs now, which I'm like, finally, this is great, helping people. I think it's opened up the conversation around access that even health authorities and regions are looking to adopt, so that they can support, so that the Alberta Children's Hospital, as an example, isn't just a Calgary thing, right? Or Calgary surrounding area. Now, I'm not saying anything in that kind of way, but I am referring to the fact that it would provide centers that are known to be Alberta or BC Children's Hospital. It allows them to be actually Alberta-based, BC-based, not just Vancouver, not just Calgary or sick kids in Toronto. It can go wider, right? And so from my perspective, it reduces financial barriers for people to gain access. It allows them not have to leave their home and have transportation issues, especially for families that are vulnerable or have lower socioeconomic status, where it's too expensive to go because I have to park or grab transit or arrange a time off work. And so I can see this being as another adjunct approach to what we're already doing in the public system. And I've been so thrilled that people who work at these hospitals and other locations in public service have come and received our training, right? And it inspires me. And whether they're faculty members or practicing clinicians training the next generation, it's been really powerful. And so where I see it going is we do see movement in British Columbia and Nova Scotia and Ontario, where they are looking at opening up provincial healthcare related bills and acts to look at pushing psychological services to go under public health care. So allowing private clinics like ours at times to be able to bill public health care in the same way that you do when you see your family doc.
Absolutely.
And I've been so thrilled to see this momentum. And I'm very optimistic that this can happen. And ironically, some people say to me, "Aren't you scared, Mitch? Like if this becomes public, isn't that going to hurt your business?"
Hmm.
And from an entrepreneurial perspective, and I say, I would love that.
Yeah.
I would be the first one to flip
Yeah.
because that means there's no reason
Yes.
for people not to have help now.
Wow.
And I don't have to negotiate fees and work with third-party insurance. I can just help,
Wow.
right? So come at me,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
I'll be a
Yeah.
pilot.
I'll socialize this. No problem.
I'll make it work,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to see that in Nova Scotia, Ontario, BC, we're seeing that. And I'm optimistic
Mhm.
Alberta's a
Yeah.
trailblazer too.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if I saw them do something fun too.
Absolutely. There's a tomorrow culture that's always blazing the next trail to make things better. Even if we had a great day yesterday, tomorrow
Yeah.
can be a bit better. It's
Exactly.
very resilient, and
Yeah.
love what I see happening with mental health and addictions in this province as well.
Mhm.
One thing, Mitch, actually, it's the last thing. Got to wrap this up, bring
Oh.
this, land this plane, which
Mhm.
is hard to do because there's so much information here to dive into. But what I love about your vision, not just your vision, the work you're doing, you're already doing this, is it's not just up and over. How can we have more, PhD
Mhm.
psychologists for more people?
Mhm.
It's actually down and under as well. How do we proliferate the ability to do this in a more accessible way earlier and more often?
Mhm.
Very akin to our mission at
Mhm.
Impact Society.
Mhm.
Um, how's that going a little bit, but also how can other people who are listening, whether they're educators or psychologists or parents even, how can they start to be more of an advocate for, I guess, this revolution in assessment and support?
Mhm. I think one example of things that could be done is, recognizing that, so we'll start off maybe with teachers. I think there's an understanding that teachers are able to share with the families they work with, their administrators, that, psychological assessment is not just used for, identifying kids with challenges,
Hmm.
right? I think that's an older way of thinking. And I think there's an opportunity here to understand that we can have a lot of meaning and value in the process. But I think the process to be that more meaning and value, it needs to be very collaborative. So if teachers and other school boards are open to collaborating and being very involved in the processes that we engage with their kids in their classrooms, it really much helps us with this vision. Now, another thing they're able to do is to advocate to their school administrators that, despite the fact that we don't have people in our community doing this service, there's people outside of our community who can provide these services virtually or remotely so that our kids don't have to go without.
Yeah.
And clinics like mine and others, again, there's many of my colleagues that like to do this work. We're open to helping whatever way we can, and we're willing to try different modes like virtual to make it happen. So I think school boards being open to this, like others have been, such as Medicine Hat School Board, in our chats with Calgary Catholic and here in Calgary Board of Education, there are boards that are very open to these conversations and seeking services different ways. So I think advocating to their administration, advocating to their districts that we need supports, and there's people like Hexagon and Mitch and other teams out here that can do this work well, and we don't have to go without. Is one good advocate kind of piece here, so we can increase access for those communities
Hmm.
is one piece. And I think for parents, recognizing that if parents are wanting to advocate for this as well, I would be suggesting messaging and talking to their representatives in the province or things like that to ask and request and continue to pound the drum that mental health services, even if it's just assessment or counseling services by regulated members,
Hmm.
should be covered by primary care. Right? He's like your taxes deserve that service. The brain is part of your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the same way that in the service. So I think that there's opportunities to advocate for the service both provincially and to reach out if they have questions about these types of services as well.
Very cool. My last question is kind of how do we summarize this? And we talked a lot about a lot of amazing things, and you bring up the term advocacy, which is essential, especially for the next generation to have not just advocates for them as individuals, but to have a system that can continually bring out the best in them as early and often as possible. What's, if we're thinking about advocating or just us having this conversation today, what's, if you could, in, short summary, what's one thing we should be talking about more in order to move this forward?
I think one thing we need to talk about is that we need to move this piece forward. I think we need to be talking about public funding of mental health services and the training pipeline for mental health professionals coming out in training programs and education. I think we see an ongoing need for mental health. We see a bubble, so we need funding to make sure that the people who are the most vulnerable can have access to the services in a timely manner. In order to do that, we need to have an efficient supply of professionals to provide that service. And if they have gaps in their schedule at an in-person clinic, maybe they can do some of it virtually.
Right.
And maybe we can still access people despite that they're not in urban centers.
Love it.
Is what I would say. So if we can advocate for those types of services, I think this world in Canada and the US as well will be a much better place.
Not just shields, an army.
Yeah, not just shields. Let's start making some metal.
I love it.
Right.
Well, Mitch, thanks for coming on the show today. And it's been an honor, not just this hour to spend with you, but over the last few years building a broader impact together. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you so much.